I knew the second I saw the pink spray paint streaked across the side of my Navy patrol boat. It was going to be one of those days. Bright, obnoxious, and completely illegal 3 words that also described Deborah Rainsworth, president of our HOA and the reigning queen of passive-aggressive vendettas. I parked my truck so fast the tires squealed, leapt out, and marched across the driveway. My patrol boat 20-foot aluminum hull, retired from active duty but still seaworthy, was tagged all across the side with the words, "Neighborhood Blight. Real classy, Deb. I'm Vincent Warley." I served 12 years in the Navy, did port security, and picked up this retired patrol boat at a government auction. She's a beast and she's mine. I park her on my own damn driveway, which by the way is legal in our county. I checked. Twice. Deborah must have waited until I was overnight at work to pull this stunt. I work security at the VA hospital, 3rd shift. She knew that. She's been trying to get me to relocate the boat for months because, in her words, it was lowering the tone of the neighborhood. As I examined the paint, I spotted the security camera I'd installed on the garage. God bless paranoia. I grabbed the footage and went inside, already dialing the sheriff's non-emergency line. "Sir, you're telling me the HOA president vandalized your property with spray paint?" the deputy asked when he arrived. "Not just any property," I said, pointing to the registration plaque on the hull. "That right, there is a federally registered vessel. This isn't just vandalism, it's a federal offense." The deputy raised his eyebrows and looked back at the boat. "You got proof?" I handed him the USB stick with the footage. "Clear as day, that's her. Came over at 3 a.m., hoodie, gloves, but she looked right into the camera after she finished her little masterpiece like she was proud of it." He took one look and gave a low whistle. "She's not gonna like what comes next." "I don't care what she likes," I said. She crossed a line. An hour later, Deborah strutted down the sidewalk in her usual tennis whites, sunglasses pushed up on her head like she was heading to brunch with some senator's wife. "Vincent," she called, voice sugary sweet. "I saw the patrol boat was still parked out front." "I thought we had an understanding." I didn't even look at her. "We do. You don't touch my property, I don't press charges." She huffed like I'd insulted her honor. "It's an eyesore. It doesn't belong in a residential neighborhood. And you don't belong within 10 feet of my boat." "You vandalized federal property, Deborah. Enjoy explaining that to the authorities." Her jaw dropped. "Excuse me?" I nodded toward the squad car idling just up the street. "They've seen the footage, and I've already filed a report with the Coast Guard. That's a federal vessel, even retired." "You're looking at a serious fine." Deborah looked like someone had slapped her with a wet fish. "You wouldn't dare." "Oh, I already did." As she sputtered, the deputy walked over, his face unreadable. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to come with me. You have the right to remain silent." And just like that, Queen Karen of the cul-de-sac was in cuffs, escorted into a squad car with her mouth hanging open. I leaned on my tailgate, arms crossed, watching her drive off. Funny thing about bullies, they always think the rules don't apply to them, until they do. The next morning, I was already on my front porch with a mug of black coffee when the tow truck arrived. They parked right across from my driveway, and I watched in silence as they carefully loaded Deborah's silver Lexus onto the flatbed. I didn't need to ask why it had government plates hanging from the rearview mirror, not because she worked for the government. She didn't. Deborah had borrowed them from her brother, who was a retired state inspector. Apparently, she thought that little detail gave her diplomatic immunity from street parking ordinances. The deputy from the night before had passed that tidbit along after reviewing the footage. "She's been skating the law on more than just paint cans," he'd said, flipping through a stack of complaints filed by other residents. Everything from tampering with irrigation timers on neighbors' lawns to threatening fines for Halloween decorations she personally didn't like. As the truck pulled away with her car, I stepped back inside. I had a meeting to prep for. By noon, I was sitting in a conference room at the County Code Enforcement Office. Across the table sat Marlene Weber, A no-nonsense woman in her 60s with the kind of stare that could bore holes through steel siding. She was the head of municipal zoning and had been watching the HOA in our neighborhood for months. "She overstepped," I said, laying out printed stills from my security camera. "But this isn't just about vandalism. She's been using her role to target people she doesn't like. I've got affidavits from 3 other homeowners. And these," I slid over copies of email threads, "are threats she sent from her personal account, not the HOA's. That matters, right?" Marlene didn't answer right away. She was reading, carefully. Her pen tapped a rhythm against the table. "She used HOA funds to hire a private contractor to repaint her fence last March," she finally said. "Claimed it was community upkeep, only her fence got painted." I nodded. "She's also been collecting excess dues and stashing them in a separate account. I got that from the former treasurer. He quit last month and gave me the ledger. You've got more than enough here to trigger a formal audit," she said. "And if we find she misappropriated funds or used her position for personal gain, we'll file charges." "Do it," I said, "and make it public." She raised an eyebrow. "You want this to go loud?" "I want the neighborhood to know exactly who they've been giving power to." 2 days later, the news hit the local paper, not front page, but close enough. "HOA president under investigation for misuse of funds, federal vandalism charges pending." I left 3 copies on the community bulletin board and another on Deborah's front porch, weighted down with a rock. That evening, I heard a knock at the door. I opened it to find Jeremy, the guy who lived 2 houses down, lanky, flannel-wearing, and quiet. He ran a small engine repair business out of his garage. Deborah once fined him for leaving a lawnmower on his own porch overnight. "You really doing this?" he asked. "Already started," he nodded toward the boat. "You mind if I help clean it up? My cousin runs a detailing shop. We got equipment." I stepped aside. "You help with that, I'll buy the beer." By the end of the weekend, the graffiti was gone, the hull buffed to a shine, and half the block had come out to lend a hand. Somebody brought burgers. One of the teenagers set up a speaker playing classic rock. And for the first time in months, nobody was worried about getting fined for having their trash cans out past noon. On Monday, a city official arrived with a clipboard and a badge. He was there to install a lock on the HOA's clubhouse door. Deborah had been removed from her role pending investigation. The board was dissolved temporarily, and a court-appointed auditor was taking over. I was just finishing up repainting the mailbox post when I saw her emerge from her house. She walked slowly, no makeup, hair undone, looking about 10 years older than she had a week ago. She didn't say anything, just stood on her front lawn, watching as the city official posted a notice on the clubhouse door. "Is this what you wanted?" she asked finally. "No," I said without looking up. "What I wanted was to be left alone." She folded her arms. "You made this personal." I stood, wiped my hands on a rag. "No, Deborah, you did that when you took a can of paint to a piece of my past." You don't get to cry foul when the rules you've been twisting finally snap back. She turned and walked away without another word. The fines came through a week later. $300,000 for defacing a federally registered vessel. Apparently, the Coast Guard doesn't take kindly to people vandalizing anything with a hull number. Add to that the civil penalties from misused HOA funds, and she was looking at a financial crater she'd never climb out of. The neighborhood voted the following month to disband the HOA entirely. Turns out, most of us were done with being told what color our mailboxes could be and how many cars we could have in the driveway. We formed a voluntary neighborhood council instead. No dues, no fines, just a group of people who looked out for each other. A few folks moved away, including Deborah. Her house went up for sale quietly, no open house, no listing signs. One day it was hers, the next it was empty. No one missed her. Jeremy and I took the boat out the following weekend. Clear skies, smooth water. We cracked open a couple of cold ones and just sat on the deck, watching the shoreline drift by. You ever think about naming her? He asked, patting the side of the boat. I thought for a moment, then nodded. Yeah, I said. Call her Consequences. 3 weeks after Deborah vanished from the neighborhood, the mailbox at her old house started overflowing. Flyers, tax notices, and what looked like certified letters poked out of the metal slot like weeds pushing through concrete. No one had come to claim them. The blinds were still shut tight, and the grass had grown high enough to hide a dachshund. It was like the house had given up, as if the place itself had been holding its breath for too long and finally exhaled. I wasn't paying the house much attention until a city inspector flagged me down while I was hosing down the trailer hitch on the boat. You Vincent Warley? He asked as he stepped out of a white sedan with faded lettering. Yeah, I said, cutting the water off. What's up? Need to ask you a few things about the previous occupant of number 36, he said, gesturing toward Deborah's place. You got a minute? I leaned against the fender and nodded. Sure. He opened a folder and flipped through a stack of photos. We pulled permits for a backyard renovation project she filed about 4 months ago. Claimed she was installing a koi pond funded through HOA beautification grants. You ever see any work being done? No, I said. That yard was untouched before she left. That supposed pond was just a pile of old bricks and one broken lawn chair. He muttered something under his breath and pulled a second set of documents from the folder. Thing is, the city paid out nearly $40,000 in matching funds for that project, all signed off, all marked completed. And she submitted photos. Photos of what? He handed me a printout. It showed a koi pond, all right, just not hers. I recognized the landscaping. It belonged to a botanical garden 2 towns over. I'd been there with my niece the summer before. She faked this, I asked, more surprised than anything. He nodded, and not just once. We've traced at least 3 other fraudulent grant applications tied to her name, all for HOA property upgrades that never happened, playground resurfacing, community garden, solar lighting. Total payout from city and state funds is pushing $200,000. I whistled low. No wonder she ran. She didn't run far, he said. She's in a holding facility pending arraignment, but we're building a separate case on the grant fraud. Thought you might want to testify since you provided the initial documentation for the vandalism complaint. I nodded. Happy to. I gave my statement 2 days later at the county courthouse. The assistant district attorney, a sharp-eyed woman named Deborah Rainsworth, already had a thick binder open in front of her before I even sat down. She used her HOA position to fabricate improvement projects, she said, flipping to a page showing a spreadsheet of payouts. She'd file the grant, approve it through the HOA board basically just herself, and 2 people she bribed with waived dues, then submit fake photos and pocket the funds. She ever cash anything under someone else's name? I asked. Not yet, Deborah said. But she did open a shell landscaping company under an LLC. That's where the payments went. She paid herself. I shook my head. I knew she was controlling, didn't know she was this deep in. People like her count on no one looking too closely, Deborah said. But once you opened that door with the federal property damage report, the rest unraveled fast. That week, several residents from the neighborhood were subpoenaed, mostly to verify that none of the supposed improvements ever happened. Jeremy gave a statement about the non-existent sprinkler upgrades Deborah claimed to have installed. Marcy from 2 doors down testified about the new benches that were supposedly delivered to the park entrance benches that, surprise, never existed. But the real bombshell came during the pretrial hearing. Deborah's legal defense team tried to argue that she had verbal approval from a former city official to reallocate some of the funds. They even produced a letter on official-looking letterhead claiming discretionary authority had been granted. Deborah leaned over and handed the judge a copy of that very letter with a printed email from the actual city official attached. He'd never written it. The document was a forgery. The courtroom went silent. You could feel the temperature drop 10 degrees. That's a felony, the judge said after a long pause. You're saying the defendant forged municipal documents in addition to misusing public funds. Elena didn't even blink. Yes, Your Honor. With intent to defraud. The judge ordered Deborah held without bail pending trial. The look on her face as the bailiff turned her around and cuffed her again wasn't rage or arrogance this time. It was something else, something hollow. Back in the neighborhood, the mood had shifted. We weren't just rebuilding from her reign of control anymore. We were digging out the rot. A few of the residents who'd quietly sided with her during her tenure stopped showing up to the new neighborhood council meetings. Nobody said anything, but there was a quiet consensus we were better off without them. The city auctioned off the contents of the HOA's former storage unit. It was mostly junk, faded banners, unopened cases of bottled water from a block party that never happened, and a bunch of unused signage for neighborhood compliance days. But tucked in one of the boxes was a folder labeled Private Correspondence. I wasn't supposed to see it. But the city clerk who oversaw the auction recognized me and handed it over. "Figured you'd want this," he said. "It's about you." Inside were printed email exchanges between Deborah and an attorney she'd quietly hired months before tagging the boat. She'd been planning a campaign to reclassify certain properties in the neighborhood as non-conforming structures, which would have given her the power to fine or forcibly remove anything she deemed disruptive, including boats, trailers, even certain garden sheds. But the best part: she'd already submitted a draft of the reclassification to the county zoning board under a pseudonym claiming to be a concerned resident. It wasn't just a power trip. It was a coordinated attempt to rewrite the rules of the entire neighborhood. I turned the folder over to the DA's office. Elena accepted it with a raised eyebrow. "Every time we think we've hit the bottom," she said, "she hands us a shovel." 6 weeks later, her trial began. The courtroom was packed. Not with media, though. A local news van did hover outside, but with neighbors. People who'd been fined, threatened, ignored, or bullied. People who, for the first time, had a voice. The jury didn't take long. Guilty on 7 counts of fraud, 2 counts of document forgery, and 1 count of criminal mischief involving federal property. Her sentence: 12 years. No parole eligibility for at least half that. The day she was sentenced, the neighborhood threw a barbecue, not to celebrate her downfall, but as a kind of ritual cleansing. We grilled, we drank, and we let the kids run wild without worrying about who might tattle because someone's kite string crossed the sidewalk. I stood on my porch with Jeremy, both of us watching the sun dip low behind the rooftops. "You ever think we'd get here?" he asked. "No," I said. "But I'm glad we did." The boat Consequences was docked beside the house, freshly waxed and gleaming. I'd added a new detail to the side, a small emblem of an anchor wrapped in ivy with the words "Liberty through grit" etched underneath. We'd earned it. And after everything, we weren't just a street full of strangers anymore. We were a neighborhood. The first time I saw the for sale sign come down from Deborah's old yard, I was trimming the hedges behind the garage. A black Escalade pulled up, slow and deliberate, like its driver was casing the place. Out stepped a man in a pressed charcoal suit, sunglasses on despite the overcast sky. He walked the perimeter, took a few photos on a tablet, and left without so much as glancing up at the neighbors watching him behind curtains and half-closed blinds. 2 days later, a moving truck arrived. 2 guys in uniforms unloaded a few crates and sealed boxes, but no furniture, no plants, no signs of life. Just items labeled with barcodes and printed manifests. The house still looked empty, and whoever bought it hadn't shown their face. That was enough to raise suspicions. Not just with me, but with several of us who dealt with Deborah's schemes firsthand. We'd seen enough shady behavior to know when something didn't smell right. A week passed. Then, too, no lights on at night, no trash cans rolled to the curb, not even a car in the driveway. But one morning, Jeremy came knocking while I was replacing the trim on the garage window. "There's a guy in the house," he said. "Saw him through the window, looks like private security. Tactical vest, earpiece, the whole deal. Did he say anything?" I asked, setting down the nail gun. Didn't even look at me, but he had a badge on his belt, not police. Looked federal. We decided to let it lie for the moment. If it was a federal matter, we weren't going to get answers by poking around, but curiosity has a way of digging in deeper the more you try to ignore it. 2 nights later, I was out on the porch, sipping bottled water and listening to the faint hum of cicadas, when I saw a dark SUV roll up without headlights. It parked halfway down the block. 3 men stepped out, none of them neighbors. They moved fast, cutting across Deborah's old lawn and disappearing around the back of the house. Seconds later, the porch light flicked on and the man Jeremy had seen open the front door, gun drawn. I didn't wait. I grabbed my phone, hit speed dial, and reported an active break-in. I also turned the garage camera toward the street just in time to catch 2 of the men sprinting back toward the SUV. The third wasn't so lucky. The security officer tackled him just before he reached the curb. By the time the sheriff's deputies arrived, backup included an unmarked vehicle with Department of Justice plates. The scene was locked down within minutes. I stood on my porch, arms folded, watching as the man who'd been tackled was cuffed and hauled into the back of a cruiser. The DOJ agent approached me, his expression unreadable. "You the one who called it in?" he asked. "Yeah, saw the whole thing," he nodded. "Appreciate it. You probably helped stop something a lot bigger than a burglary." I raised an eyebrow. "Mind telling me what's going on?" He glanced back at the house, then leaned in slightly. "Off the record, the woman who used to live here, Deborah Rainsworth, wasn't just defrauding your HOA. She was part of a larger scheme tied to municipal grant laundering. We've traced over $2 million in diverted funds across 4 counties. This property was being used as a drop point." I blinked. "A drop point? You mean like a dead drop?" "Exactly. She used fake improvement projects to funnel government funds into shell companies. Then the money was moved through layered transactions and eventually converted into physical assets, things stored here, temporarily, before being sold or moved offshore. So those crates the movers brought in. Part of a sting, we had to let the sale go through to see who'd come to collect. Tonight they did." The agent handed me a card. "If anyone else shows up asking questions about this house, give us a call. You did the right thing." As they packed up and left, it hit me just how deep the rot had gone. Deborah hadn't just been a tyrant with a clipboard, she'd been laundering money under the neighborhood's nose for who knows how long. The fallout came fast. Within days, investigators combed through every HOA ledger, committee roster, and vendor transaction from the past 5 years. 3 former board members were indicted for accepting kickbacks in exchange for approving fake projects. One of them, a guy named Stan who used to run the neighborhood newsletter, had quietly bought a second condo in Florida with his consulting fees. News crews returned, this time with satellite trucks and live anchors. A local investigative reporter broke the full story, and suddenly, our quiet cul-de-sac was a headline. The article detailed how Deborah had exploited a little-known municipal improvement initiative, altered application thresholds to bypass oversight, and funneled funds through fake construction invoices. The city responded with sweeping reforms. The grant program was frozen indefinitely, pending a full audit. A new oversight committee was established, this time made up of residents and vetted city officials, not self-appointed HOA monarchs. The court ordered restitution for the stolen funds. Deborah's assets were seized, including the house and everything in it. Her bank accounts were frozen. A federal judge tacked on additional charges: conspiracy to commit wire fraud and obstruction of justice when she tried to delete evidence after her arrest. Her sentence was increased to 16 years with no early release. The neighborhood held a vote to formally dissolve the HOA charter, not just suspend it. It passed unanimously. In its place, we formed a volunteer-run neighborhood watch and maintenance crew, funded through donations and small events. We painted fences, repaired sidewalks, and even started a community garden in the empty lot at the end of the block. No dues. No fines, just neighbors helping neighbors. One afternoon, I was working on refinishing the deck on the back of the house when a city official arrived with a small engraved plaque. "For your assistance in exposing corruption and aiding in a federal investigation," she said, handing it to me with a quiet smile. It read, "In recognition of civic integrity and service to community." I didn't need an award, but it felt good knowing that something good had come from all this, that we hadn't just survived the storm, we'd rebuilt something better in its place. Later that evening, Jeremy and I pushed the patrol boat, Consequences, out into the water again. We'd upgraded her with new navigation lights and a fresh coat of paint. As we drifted under the fading sky, he leaned back, hands behind his head. "You think she ever figured it'd all blow up like that?" he asked. "No," I said. "People like her never think they're the villain," he nodded slowly. "Still can't believe it went that deep." "Greed always runs deeper than it looks on the surface," I said. The water was calm, the shoreline quiet. Somewhere nearby, kids were laughing. A dog barked in the distance, and someone was grilling on a back porch. It felt like a real neighborhood again. No more secret fines. No more threats about mailbox paint or invisible bylaws, just people living. And that, after everything, was the real consequence.